He was captivated when he was only 4 years old, and it's too long, you know, it's too long.
The trauma of October 7th cannot be diminished. But strikingly invisible is the trauma of scores of Palestinians in Israeli prisons.
في الشعر هيك معصب في العينين مكلبش في ايدين لورا
להכניס מקל לרקטום של בן אדם זה לגיטימי?
כן, אם הוא נוח'בה הכל לגיטימי לעשות לו. הכל! הכל!
If you gave me a button to just erase Gaza, I would press it in a second.
It was all there before. Now all the masks are torn. Now we feel, the Israelis feel that after the 7th of October, we don't even have to apologize.
I cannot take part in what the military is doing. I cannot take part in the occupation. I cannot take part in the ongoing genocide that we're seeing in Gaza.
Around 200 Iranian ballistic missiles launched from Iran rained down across Israel this evening.
I'm in Tel Aviv in Israel. A year ago, Israel underwent a horrific attack. Hamas fighters stormed out of the Gaza Strip and killed over 1,000 Israelis. They took about 250 hostages. Several of them, seen on this wall, at the time we're recording this, are still trapped inside Gaza. Israel said it had the right to retaliate, and of course it did. And at the time, it had, in a sense, the moral high ground. The world was behind Israel. But now, a year later, the manner in which the war, the conflict has unfolded in Gaza, and the reaction of Israeli society has raised serious questions within Israel itself as to whether the country is at the risk of losing its moral compass. Land in Tel Aviv airport, and one of the first sights, images of the Israeli hostages of October 7th still in Hamas's custody. The message of bring them home is everywhere, along the streets, on buildings, and the focus of a weekly protest gathering in the heart of Tel Aviv every Saturday for the past year. Here we meet Jimmy Miller. His cousin's family was taken that day by Hamas, including his 7-month-old nephew Kafar, who is now 1.5 years old.
Now he's more than 1.5 years. He spent a lot of time in the captivity, more time that he was, free over here in Israel. And his brother is now 5 years old. He was captivated when he was only 4 years old. And it's too long, it's too long. And we don't know nothing about them. We don't have any information. We don't have nothing.
Such voices, a constant reminder 1 year later of the unresolved trauma of an entire nation. The trauma of October 7th, the Israeli lives lost, the 100-odd hostages that still remain in Gaza, cannot be diminished, and in fact is not diminished. The hostage story is highly visible in Israeli and international media at countless forums in Israel and around the world, and of course at the protests. But strikingly invisible from the public conversation in Israel is the trauma of scores of Palestinians in Israeli prisons. According to one estimate, the number has doubled after October 7th, placing it at about 10,000 Palestinian prisoners currently in Israeli custody.
Ces enculés, mon neveu? Ces fils de putain?
Nothing captures Israel's dark turn more than reports of rampant torture of Palestinian prisoners by the Israeli army in the aftermath of the Hamas attack and the country's reaction to it. In the town of Nablus, in the Palestinian territory of West Bank, we meet Nidal Haj Mohammad, a self-described activist who fights for Palestinian rights. Mohammad was already in custody before October 7th. After that day, he said, life in prison became hell.
الضرب.
Beating.
ضرب في كل نواحي جسمك. بضربوك في العصي.
With a stick.
All بضربوك في رجليهم.
In his legs.
في الشعر هيك.
In his hair.
معصب في العينين.
Close your eyes.
في ايدين لورا.
Tied your hands.
صدقني انك بتموت 4-5 مرات خلال 1 اور. والكل بيشارك في ضربك من مدير السجن لفراش السجن. واعطيه كمان بين ملاحظه الممرض
The doctor.
او الحفيش او الدكتور بيشارك في ضربك.
Sharing with beating you.
The doctor was
يس الدكتور بيشارك في ضربك. يعني انا من الناس اللي شارك في ضرب الدكتور.
The beatings, he says, were not to extract information, just to accuse him for the Hamas attack in Gaza.
So when they were beating you, the Israeli guards or the Israeli army, what were they saying? Like, what were they
شو
saying?
بقول لما يضربوك؟
ولا شيء. بقول لك انت السبب في 7 اكتوبر. انت السبب، يعني مش بس انا. all person هم السبب في 7 اكتوبر.
Mohammad was held under administrative detention, a provision which allows the army to round up scores of Palestinians without specific charges. He was released in July this year without being charged. He wants to show me how a year later, the very mention of October 7th triggers a physical reaction.
Put your hand in his heart. You can show his feeling.
Oh my God, yeah.
خلص هاي شعوريا بعد 7 اكتوبر.
على الواقف كنا نعد هيك على الواقف، عارف علي؟ هلا لما شدت الحرب صرنا نعد نفوت هيك وهيك.
A similar harrowing account from Noor Halawa, another activist. Picked up 2 weeks after the Hamas attack under administrative detention, he says because he led street protests against Israeli occupation. In the prison he was held, he said dogs were set on him.
مرات شغلات فجائية بنبقى قاعدين كيف بيعملوا هن قمعات، بيفتح الباب عليك وبدش عليك الكلب بفلته. يعني أنا واحد من الناس فوت علينا الكلب، بطحني الكلب، بطحنا على الأرض، لو فيش عتم الكمامة أملي راسي، تم وكرزت أنا فيه أتفش فيه من الخوف، تميت مكرز يعني فيه، والشباب بتصيح وهجموا علينا. طبعا بهجموا عليك بأنبوب غاز والفلفل وبلشوا ضرب بكل اللي موجود بالغرفة من غير أي سبب يعني. وأنا جايك بالتفصيل. هلا عندك أثناء العدد ما يجي يعدونا كنت أنت تستنى دورك تموت، على أساس قبل ما يفوت يعدك يضرب الغرفتين اللي قدامك، تسمع أصحابك الأسرى هنا بتكسروا بالدبسات وبنضربوا وبدشوا عليهم الكلاب البوليسية، وهو مزاجي اليوم بده يضرب هدول الغرفتين بكره بيجي بضربكم انتم.
Noor was also released without being charged.
Accusations of torture against the Israeli army are not new, but human rights groups have charted an alarming rise both in the number of Palestinians in custody and the intensity of the abuse after the October 7th attacks. Shai Parnes works with B'Tselem, a Tel Aviv-based human rights watchdog. Their latest report, Welcome to Hell, chronicles through the voices of over 50 Palestinian prisoners the terrifying world of Israeli prisons in the aftermath of October 7th.
What we're seeing since October 7 in the Israeli prison facilities, what was shocking for us is how similar those testimonies which of Dutch mentions, how the similarities. They all speak about constant beating and violence, about sleep deprivation, about lack of sanitation facilities, about lack of hygienic tools provided by the authorities. That's why our conclusion in the report say it's routine and systematic. It's a policy.
Worse, in the post-October 7th Israel, the policy of abuse appears to have widespread support.
הם לוקחים את המחבל,
As seen in this case, Israeli soldiers caught on camera forming a barrier around a Palestinian prisoner as they rape him. The video from inside Sde Teman, a military detention facility in southern Israel.
A number of soldiers were detained on charges of aggravated sodomy and abuse.
A severe jolt to the army's self-image as a professional force, even as it was battling a firestorm of criticism for its actions in Gaza. A bigger jolt was in store. Israel's far-right groups stormed the detention facility where the soldiers were held, demanding their release. Accompanying them, members of Israel's parliament or Knesset. In parliament, MPs said the torture was justified.
להכניס מקל לרקטום של בן אדם זה לגיטימי?
כן, אם הוא נוח'בה הכל לגיטימי לעשות לו. הכל.
You might wonder why this, a justification for rape, didn't make the news. It did, but as a tweet, an Instagram reel, and a brief headline, it certainly didn't get the international outrage it deserved. This was a blip in a news cycle that's overwhelmed by updates and disinformation. We at Newslaundry knew that this needed more. That's why Sreenivasan Jain went to Israel to build a story that deserves more than a tweet that deserves your attention. He'll also report from ground zero on another frontier of disinformation, the United States, where Donald Trump will face off against Kamala Harris in the presidential election in November. Subscriptions like yours will send him there. It'll allow us to fact-check people in power and tell stories that are in public interest. Log on to newslaundry.com/subscription or scan the QR code on your screen right now. Choose an amount that's convenient for you and fund our journalism.
Asaf Orion is a former Israeli army officer and Washington, D.C. based policy analyst. He said a new lawlessness was on the rise in Israel, linked to a polarizing political climate.
When politics are polarized and people perceive this war as a total war that needs to be fought in every place, at home and outside, and battle itself is a place where commanders need to make sure that the values and the laws are being upheld, and the same applies to the prisons. So I think it's a struggle that combines the values of Israel itself, its politics, and battlefield realities.
It's not just politicians. In this viral clip from an Israeli news show, a panelist calls for rape against Palestinians to be institutionalized.
בגדול, עוד פעם, זה מעניין לי את העכוז מה עשו לאיש חמאס הזה. אני כל הזמן זוכר, קודם כל, הדבר היחיד שמבחינתי הוא בעיה פה, זה שזו לא איזושהי מדיניות מוסדרת של המדינה להתעלל בעצירים. כי בגדול, זה גם, קודם כל מגיע להם, וזה אחלה נקמה שאנחנו צריכים לתת להם. ודבר שני, In
another viral clip from a podcast called Two Good Jewish Boys, the co-host fantasizes about carrying out a genocide in Gaza.
If you gave me a button to just erase Gaza, every single living being in Gaza would no longer be living tomorrow, I would press it in a second. You press this, all the Palestinians are gone.
You might think I'm extreme, but I have conversations with lots of people, coworkers, friends. People enjoy knowing that they are suffering.
Gideon Levy is one of Israel's leading dissident journalists, a columnist for one of the country's top newspapers, Haaretz. He says Israel's dark turn after October 7th is not new. It's the inevitable next step in the country's decades-long project of dehumanizing Palestinians.
It was all there before. Now all the masks are torn. Now the Israelis feel that after the 7th of October, we don't even have to apologize. We don't even have to pay lip service.
Right.
We can say clearly the Palestinians are not equal human beings like us. look at the 7th of October and draw the conclusions that we claim for years. They are not human beings like us. We are moral and they are the barbaric Palestinians. That's the way of thinking.
That way of thinking, he says, has made voices like his a minority in today's Israel.
Now you can't even call it a minority, because when you speak about voices in plural, I start to think, who else? I mean, I was never so lonely like in this war. Lonely in terms of my position. Never.
Never before?
Never before was it that Israel is speaking only in one voice and is not ready to hear any alternative voice. Nothing.
At an earlier time, he said, thousands would rally against atrocities by the Israeli state.
In '82, there was a massacre in Lebanon in two Palestinian refugee camps, Sabra and Shatila. A horrible massacre made by the Christians in Lebanon, not by Israelis, but under the supervision of Israel. On the same night after this massacre, there were 400,000 protesters in the streets of Tel Aviv. '82. Today, if the same thing happened, you can't get 400.
Right.
And that's the shift.
That's the shift. So what you see when you see the protests on the streets of Tel Aviv and elsewhere from outside the country,
it has nothing to do with it.
It's got nothing to do with the war.
No,
it's got nothing to do with the sort of atrocities of the war.
Exactly.
It's to do with bring back the hostages and perhaps anti-Netanyahu protests.
Exactly. I couldn't phrase it better. It has nothing to, and therefore you will never see me there, and you will never hear my support to them, because they are protesting only against Netanyahu and in favor to bring back the hostages. Nothing else interests them.
Indeed, a majority of the thousands of protesters who gather every week in downtown Tel Aviv have a clear focus. What brings you here?
I want to bring the hostages back home. I want to protest against my government. It doesn't do anything about it.
You feel they're not doing enough?
Hardly enough. They care more about the politics. And the Prime Minister wants to remain in power regardless of what, but it doesn't show any care about the hostages in Gaza right now.
What brings you guys here today?
We really want the war to stop and all the hostages to come back home.
Do you feel that it's just important to bring the hostages back, but once they're back, should the war continue? Or, I mean, what's your position on the war as a whole?
I don't have any real conclusion. I don't know that this is our leaders should think about it. But right now they think only about their own survival. As I said right now, they don't think about the future of this country, the future of this area, of the region.
The explicitly anti-war protesters make up a small number. So are those like Gideon Levy justified in feeling isolated? On the sidelines of the rally, I meet a member of a new generation of Jewish anti-war dissenters. This is Tal Mitnick, 19 years old, who refused to serve in the military, compulsory under Israeli law. For his act of dissent, he had to spend multiple stints in an Israeli prison.
5 times for a total of 185 days.
5 times, 185 days. So what made you say no?
I saw the situation that we have in this land. I kind of realized that I cannot take part in what the military is doing. I cannot take part in the occupation. I cannot take part in the ongoing genocide that we're seeing in Gaza. I cannot take part. And the only way forward is demilitarization and a peace process between us and Palestinians. Because at the end of the day, our security, Israeli security and Palestinian security, they go together. You can't separate us. You can't have Israeli security without having Palestinian security. And for that reason, I refused.
Tal is part of a group, Meservot, which is attempting to provide a platform to Israeli refuseniks. Their numbers are small, he says, but growing.
Since the war, there have been more than 5 or 6 or 7 that have come out publicly, which is different than there are I know dozens of people that because of the war got an exemption and kind of got out silently without talking about it publicly. But I see that I have a very big privilege in having the supportive community and being able to speak out, and that's why I speak out.
With such small numbers, is Tal hopeful of change?
I don't think we have the privilege to lose hope. Us living on this side of the fence, and us having such a privileged life, for the people born on the other side, for the people living under the occupation and living under this horrendous war, we don't have the privilege to lose hope, and we have to keep fighting for this place, both for us Israelis and for Palestinians, for a better future for us all.